Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for your interest in the 2024 James Irvine Foundation Leadership Awards Program. My name is Cindy Downing and I'm a program officer with the foundation. I work out of our San Francisco office, and I'm joined with our team here with Capital Impact. And we are excited to host this informational webinar today to help you all submit a competitive nomination for the 2024 awards. Today, we'll be providing an overview of the program, our team, the selection criteria and process, and we will also share some tips for nominating a leader. We'll also be sure to reserve the last 20 or 30 minutes to today's webinar for your questions. I wanted to start off with just a brief overview about the foundation. If we could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. The James Irvine Foundation is a private nonprofit grant-making institution that's dedicated to expanding the opportunities for the people of California since its founding in 1937. In recent years, Irvine has begun to narrow our focus and our grant-making in order to achieve our singular goal of a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. In 2021, we approved $129 million in grants to 442 organizations. And while I'm very proud of Irvine on our grant making and focus in economic development and worker protections and rights, I'm excited that the awards program continues as it plays an important role in lifting up critical work and innovative models of leaders, regardless of issue, of community, sector, or region. And it also helps the foundation to learn about effective work taking place throughout the state and about programs and areas outside of our core grant making that still impacts the well-being of low-income Californians. The awards we provide, the program provides a special way to support the work of leaders and organizations that we may not know about or fund through our other programs. If we could advance to the next slide, please. And I can share a bit more about the program and its history. It began in 2006. Each year, we've recognized individuals and organizations that are confronting the state's most critical challenges with innovative and effective solutions that improve people's lives and contribute to a better California. The foundation spotlights these leaders, helps share their approaches with policymakers and peers, and provides each of the recipients' organizations with a $250,000 grant and some important additional resources. Since its beginning in 2006, we've recognized over 100 diverse and innovative leaders in California. And most recently, Irvine has made an important shift to the day-to-day operations of the program by deepening an existing relationship that we had with Capital Impact, a Sacramento-based consulting firm that now serves as the external manager for the Leadership Awards program. Irvine, the foundation, continues to fully fund and support and be committed to the awards program. And we are grateful to Capital Impact and their partners in this expanded role and the ability to take the program to the next level and to continue to support the alumni and the recipients in their leadership development. And with that, I would like to introduce a trusted colleague and partner at Capital Impact who oversees the day-to-day operations for the program, Melissa Granville, and she will walk through a bit more about what we will cover today and how to craft a compelling and strong nomination.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today and for your interest in nominating a leader for the 2024 Leadership Awards. I popped this into the chat, but if you have any questions during our presentation today, please submit them in the Q&A tool, and We will either address them in real time or at the end of the webinar. We want this to address your questions. So a lot of the conversation will be focused on hearing from you as well. Since Cindy already shared about the foundation and the Leadership Awards program, I'll jump right in by sharing more about the selection committee and the selection timeline. Next slide, please. So each year, an independent selection committee of California leaders identifies 4 to 6 recipients of the Leadership Awards. These leaders are distinguished for their extensive contributions to California communities and institutions, and they work in diverse fields and reflect the ethnic and regional diversity of California. You can see the selection committee members here, and they're also available their bios are also available on the Leadership Awards website. Next slide, please. So as you know, nominations are now open for the 2024 awards. And the process really starts when amazing folks like you submit nominations that reflect the diversity of California's populations and regions. So what is the process for selecting these leaders? Next slide, please. Well, after the deadline on April 27th, staff will review and advance the nominations that are most aligned with the awards criteria. In late July, the selection committee will select 10 to 12 finalists who are then notified. Nominators are also notified at this time. In August, once the finalists have been contacted, all nominators will also be notified of the status of their nomination. Between August and October, capital impact staff, consultants, and an expert in the field, the finalist field of work, will meet with the finalists individually to better understand their work and its impact on California. The selection committee will meet again in late October to review the learnings from these meetings and then select the 4 to 6 award recipients. All finalists and recipients will be notified shortly after that decision in late October. We anticipate announcing the 4 to 6 award recipients in February 2024, after which the foundation spotlights these leaders and helps share their approaches with policymakers and peers through a reception in Sacramento, meetings with policymakers, and other opportunities throughout the year. Next slide. So who is eligible to be nominated for a leadership award? Nominated leaders must be residents of California. They can be either an individual or a pair of leaders, and they can work in any sector or field. Next slide. The awards recognize notable leadership characterized by significance, innovation, effectiveness, timing, leadership capacity, and inclusiveness. So we're really looking for leaders who are addressing a critical issue for the state of California, and that their work is anticipated to affect the quality of life for a large number of Californians into the future. And their work is demonstrating, or it's an innovative approach to that critical issue and has shown some levels of effectiveness. And we will go into more details on innovation and effectiveness later in this webinar. We also are looking for work that is relevant to the current environment. So it's at a stage at which replication informing policy, it's advanced to a stage at which it could be conducive for replication and informing policy, and that there's urgency or opportunity for that nominee's work. And that the leader that is being nominated is at a position in which they are prepared to take that work to the next stage. So again, we'll dive into these more in detail, especially around innovation and effectiveness later in the webinar. Next slide. Great, and these are the 2023 award recipients that were just announced in February. They're advancing solutions on several critical issues facing California, such as housing and homelessness, tribal sovereignty and family welfare, criminal justice reform, human rights, education, food insecurity, climate change and economic justice. Incredible group of leaders. They are all of their work is very tightly aligned with the awards criteria. innovative, effective work, leaders who are well positioned to take their work to the next level, and they're building bridges between different communities across the state of California. Many of these leaders, a question that we get all the time is, can someone be nominated multiple times? And the answer is yes. Many of these leaders have been nominated multiple times before and have even been finalists in previous nomination cycles. And just because of the maturity of their work and the current political and policy environment, the selection committee thought that it was the right year for recognizing them with a leadership award. So incredible group of people. We encourage you to kind of look into their work on the website, Leadership Award's website, just to see some recent examples of strong nominations. Great. So now we'll go into a few more tips and tricks on submitting a competitive nomination. And with that, I'll pass the baton to my colleague, Catherine Hazelton.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine. I've been working with the Irvine Leadership Awards program since 2009, including as a nominations reviewer in each of those years. As Melissa noted, staff take an initial first pass at the nominations before sending to the selection committee a set of nominations that most closely align with the selection criteria. So today I'm going to share some of the tips that staff use when reviewing nominations, as well as tips based on the guidelines that the selection committee uses when it is reviewing the nominations. So just in general, I think it may be helpful to know that as we read each nomination, we assign scores based on how closely the nomination aligns with each of the selection criteria. So there are scores for each criterion, and there's also a score for something we call holistic review, and I'll talk about that too. So this means that it's important to use the prompts and address the specific criteria and questions that are asked in the nominations form, because we will be scoring each section. I'm going to start by talking about a few of the criteria and the questions that you'll encounter on the form. So as you approach the nomination, you'll start with the summary. And the summary section is where nominators describe the work of the leader and of the leader's organization. You'll note that several of the selection criteria inquire about an issue that the leader is addressing or about the leader's approach. You may have gleaned that this award is as much about the work of the leader and their organization as it is about the leader themselves. So while this is a leadership award, it's about both the leader and their work. In the summary section, you will want to describe the leader's work. So some nominations focus on the broad range of nominees' accomplishments or the broad work of their organization, which is great. Other nominations might focus on one specific model or one specific approach that the nominee is advancing or has advanced. Both of these approaches work. If you want to highlight a specific model or approach, we recommend that in the summary section, you both identify what that specific model is, but you also summarize the big picture of the nominee's work or their organization, so we understand where the model is being housed. Okay, I'll move into significance, the first criterion. In this section, nominators describe the problem that the leader and the organization are working to solve and why that problem is important to California. When you're working on significance, we recommend describing the population or the community that's affected by the problem. You might want to indicate the number of people who are affected now or projected to be affected in the future and how they're affected by this problem. Let's move into innovation. So innovations are a really important part of the leadership awards, and I'll say we think about it in a number of different ways. So innovation could include kind of your standard definition of innovation, something that represents an entirely new approach, a creative leap from standard practices, something that we really haven't seen before. But innovation could also be described in different ways. You might be describing work that is not widely known or practiced in California. So it could be a long-held traditional approach that is known within a community, but not widely known outside of that community, for example. And that could be described as innovation. Another way to think about innovation is if the leader is applying a proven approach that has been used in some context, but they're applying it in a new way or within a new context. So, for example, there might be an approach that is regularly used in Los Angeles and perhaps some other big cities, but it's really unusual to be using the same kind of approach in a rural area. And this leader's innovation is they figured out how to transform what really was an urban model into a rural model. Another type of innovation could be if a leader takes an approach that has long been practiced in the field of education and is now using it in a corrections setting. And that's where the innovation lies, placing it into a new context or a new setting. So those are all different ways that we think about innovation. A question that we ask ourselves as reviewers is whether the leader's work might serve as an informative model for other communities. So could it influence how others are approaching a problem? In that case, we have evidence of innovation. So let's look next at effectiveness. In the effectiveness section, we're looking for how the leader has achieved positive change or how they've directly improved people's lives. Has the leader made substantial progress in addressing the problem? We recommend that you describe how effective the leader has been at addressing the specific problem you described in the summary or in the significant section. So not just the nominee's overall effectiveness as a leader, but how well they've advanced their model, how well they've addressed that critical issue that you raised. We've recently broadened how we define and understand effectiveness. So I'm going to share a little bit more detail about this section. So more competitive nominations will provide tangible, measurable evidence of effectiveness, such as data from evaluations, case studies, surveys, comparison data, comparing the leader's work to work with other groups. But there's other ways we think of effectiveness as well. So there may be evidence that the leader's work has inspired policy change. That could be state or local policy change. It could be other types of policy change. Or there could be evidence that the leader's work has changed people's behavior. Some nominations provide anecdotes about how the work directly impacts a community or directly impacts people's lives. Others include examples that demonstrate the emotional impact of the leader's work. So for example, a thought-provoking work of art that has been widely viewed or widely cited would be considered evidence of effectiveness. All of these different examples are evidence of effectiveness, and a combination of several of these factors can make an even stronger case for effectiveness. Changes within the organization, like changes to the staffing, tend less compelling as evidence of effectiveness, but they might be worth noting in a couple of circumstances. It might be worth noting it if they far exceed expectations. So, the budget has grown tenfold under the leader's tenure. Or if these changes to budget or staffing level or other organizational changes are connected in some way to the leader's programmatic goals. So for example, if the leader is running a workforce development program and they've doubled their staff by hiring a significant number of their clients, that might be worth noting because it's both how they do the work as well as showing that they have been effective at it. Okay, so I'm going to skip over the other criteria for now, but we would be happy to answer questions about those criteria at any time. I want to talk a little bit about holistic review, which is another way that we assign scores as reviewers. So when we are reviewing nominations, we try to step back and consider the nomination holistically. We tend to ask ourselves a few sets of questions as we view the nomination holistically. So I want to explore 3 sets of questions that we tend to consider. The first relates to diversity. Does this particular nomination diversify the nominations pool? We consider a number of different factors as we think about diversity. So we think about the region in which the leader works, the leader's ethnic background, other personal demographic factors, any life experiences that the leader may bring to their work, especially if those experiences inform how they conduct their work. We think about the issue on which the leader works, their sector, whether they're public sector, private, nonprofit, etc. So we do really think about the diversity of that this nomination would bring to the nominations pool. We also look at the opportunity that the leader may have to leverage a leadership award. So how would receiving an award create new opportunities for this leader to expand their work and inform policy? Is the timing right? Is it likely to be relevant and prioritized by policymakers and peers over the next few years? Is the work ready to be replicated? And is the leader ready to take the work to the next level? And we consider whether recognition or resources from a leadership award would make a difference in the leader's journey. Or is the leader's organization already so large and the leader already so well known that the award wouldn't really make any difference? So we consider all of that, the opportunities that a leader could leverage a leadership award. The other element that we consider with our holistic review, it could be described as uniqueness. So is there an interesting story to tell? Do policymakers and peers in the leaders' field know this story? Do they know this leader or approach? Or would there be something new for them to learn by recognizing this leader? Has the awards program recently recognized someone already doing similar work? So for example, this year, Melissa showed the slide of this year's award recipients, and one of those includes a leader who founded an organization that is rescuing unused food from businesses and redistributing it to charities and communities in need. It'll probably be a few years before the Leadership Awards program would consider recognizing another leader doing work that specific. However, broader categories of work could be considered in consecutive years. So for example, we would be open in this year to approaches that address waste and approaches that address hunger more broadly, but not using that same exact approach that one of last year's leaders used. Okay, let's go into who should nominate. I think that's the next slide, perhaps. All right, oh, actually, I guess it's not. We're a little ahead, but that's okay. So when we think about who should nominate, our primary piece of advice is really anyone can nominate. Some think that they must get a very prominent person to submit their nomination. And while this is interesting and it might be considered, there are lots of other types of nominators who can describe and validate a nominee's work and provide context for why it matters. The most important factor is that the nominator is well acquainted with the nominee and can describe their alignment with the awards criteria. Some nominators know the nominee's policy field really well, and they can describe how the leader's approach is different from their peers. Or they might be able to identify where there's opportunity for expansion and replication because they know that policy field so well. This could be a policymaker, could be a funder or a researcher, or maybe even a board member. Other nominators can describe how they personally or other community members have been affected by the nominee's work. So this might be a client or another community leader who has observed the nominee in action. It is required that the nominator be someone other than the nominee. So you can't nominate yourself. The nominator also cannot be a family member, and preferably the nominator would not be employed by the nominee. But otherwise, it really can be anyone. Okay, now I will share some information that we have learned in recent surveys of nominators. So first, on average, we have learned that nominators spend about 3 to 8 hours preparing a nomination. Second, about 60% of nominators engaged their nominee as they prepared the nomination. So you certainly are not required to work with the nominee, but it is acceptable, you're allowed to, and apparently it's a fairly common practice. We have also received some formatting tips from nominators. They recommend drafting your nomination in a Word document outside of our nominations portal, and then copying and pasting it in. Nominators recommend not using the bullet function in Word because the formatting gets lost when it's pasted into our system. You can insert your own dashes manually to create bullets, but we don't recommend using formatted bullets in Word because they will get lost. We will note that if the formatting does end up looking a little bit odd when you use our nominations portal, it's really nothing to worry about. We don't count formatting against anyone. We're really focused on the content and not on formatting. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, I'm going to stop here for now and turn the conversation back over to Melissa so she can open up and invite questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Cindy. Great. So we'll now reserve the rest of this conversation, so about 30 minutes, for any questions that you have. Feel free to pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom. We have a couple of questions already. And we've answered a few already in the Q&A feature. So if you want to just scroll through that and see if those address your questions. But then we have a few other questions about nominator. So Catherine, I'm gonna have you field this on about nominators. I think the first question is, can the nominator be on the board, or does that seem conflicted? And then the other question is, a prominent person should nominate, so a staff member would not be considered a prominent person. So I think big question is, why can't a staff member nominate, and then could the nominator be on the board?
Yeah, so let me start with the staff member question. So the staff member very well might be a prominent person, which is, we have no judgment on that. But we typically discourage having staff nominate just because of the power dynamics involved in that, in relationships between staff and managers. It can just raise questions. We tend to find that it's more interesting to hear from community members, to hear from perhaps policymakers or others who work with the leader in the field. So staff may do it, but it's not ideal. With board members, I think it's a little different, where we don't really see that same conflict of interest with a board member. Often, as many of you know, if you work in nonprofits, your board members may be members of community. They may be hold another position somewhere in the field, and often they're your biggest cheerleaders. So board members often can make really great nominators because they understand the leader's work really well, and they can bring that perspective from the field.
Thank you, Catherine. Great. So we have a number of questions about kind of policy maker impact, and also how to kind of center the nomination about policy work. So I think, can you expand upon the policymaker part? So ultimately, we are, the awards are designed to help deepen and improve outcomes for Californians. One way to do that is to improve policy. And so we really want to help elevate models that are effective and innovative across the state of California to policymakers. That does not mean that the work needs to be policy focused in the nomination. Many folks are doing great work that policymakers need to know about. And so that's really the goal there. So your work does not need to be policy focused. However, there can be, we have selected, or the Leadership Board's selection committee has picked organizations that have had C4 and C3 work, have a strong presence in the Capitol, for example, and have worked on local and statewide policy. So that is an option, but not required.
Could I just add to that I think we take a broad view as to what is defined as policy. So there are a lot of leaders who work on various forms of systems change that aren't necessarily like housed in the state capitol. Their work might be attempting to inform how local policies are implemented. Their work might be affecting how an agency or some other government entity implements a particular program and interacts with the community. There may be other types of systems change involved. And it's not necessarily just like trying to get votes for an initiative or to like change state policy.
Thank you, Catherine. Great point. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions so far. Are there any other burning questions about the selection criteria or process or review team, the nominations form itself, or any questions? I did receive a question here that was about the recording for this webinar. So we will follow up via email to all registered or all registrants with tips and tricks. We'll follow up with some FAQ or links to the FAQ page and the nominations form, as well as this recorded webinar. Okay, I'll give folks just a minute or two if there are any questions that come up. Yes, so the question is, to clarify, staff are discouraged from submitting a nomination even if staff is in the communications outreach capacity role. Yeah, I think to Catherine's earlier points, it's helpful to have some external validation of the leader's work or the nominee's work.
And I'll just add, like, nobody's going to be disqualified for having staff nominate. It's possible that it goes unnoticed that it's staff that nominates. It's not like a ding against the award or against the nomination, but you could think of it as a missed opportunity, where having someone who is in, either in the community or has a perspective on the policy field, or has some other perspective on the nominee's work, they have the opportunity to really validate it, as Melissa said, through the nomination. That might be a missed opportunity if staff were nominating. But it's not while it's a missed opportunity, it will be a major ding against the nomination if staff does nominate.
Catherine, we have another question about, what about a consultant to the organization? They too have a different insider view of the executive or nominee.
I think, again, it's not like a count against the nomination. I think being able to, to utilize the information that the nominator has is what's most important. You need the nominator to really understand the work and to be able to talk about it fluidly and in a compelling way. And ideally, they bring some perspective to the work. And if that comes from a consultant, then, then that may be the best course.
Thank you. Great, and we got a question. I answered this in the chat, but I mentioned this earlier. We have folks who have been nominated multiple times, and unfortunately, we have a longstanding practice to maintain fairness by not providing feedback on previous nominations. But it is helpful to kind of refresh and each year and kind of think about the timing of the organization and of the nominees' work and update it based on prior years' nominations.
If I could take a second, I thought it might be helpful to just also share some of the responses I typed into the Q&A portion of in the chat for the benefit of those who maybe are listening in and having questions around nominating leaders with who are doing C4 versus 501c4 versus 501c3 work, and how that impacts the strength and competitiveness of a nomination. And I responded in with some detail around the grant making piece, because that's where that 501c4 versus 501c3 comes into play. And it is less so, and if really not much of a criteria or consideration in the nominations process and the selection and the scoring and evaluation. It's really about the work, the effectiveness, the innovation, the timeliness, the leadership capacity, the criteria that we shared earlier, and that's a part of the that's listed in the nominations form. Regardless of the attached organization and their structure. I was responding mostly about once a nomination has advanced to becoming a finalist and then selected as a recipient, then the awards team will work with them to craft the appropriate grant making structure to fund their work as flexibly as possible, while maintaining the compliance with the IRS restrictions, as well as Irvine's trust restrictions in focusing in California and a few other trust restrictions that we are bound by. But that's kind of a conversation that we reserve and try to get into more detail with finalists and recipients, and really want to focus in nominations on the work and on the leaders and the timeliness. And for those who've resubmitted nominations in the past, or who have submitted nominations in the past, about wanting to really emphasize what Melissa just shared around refreshing with that nomination, and not feeling compelled to nominate every year with the same material if it doesn't feel like there's enough to offer up something different, or to add in a different component to the nomination. It's really about the quality versus the quantity. And so hoping that helps to reframe a bit of the C4 versus C3 discussion, and really to highlight and to underscore work that is effective, that is making an impact, regardless of the organization that the leader is tied to.
Thanks, Cindy. All great points. One tip that hasn't quite come up yet, though I think Catherine talked a little bit about some of these parts. It is very helpful when you're looking at the full nomination to have the flow work together. So when you're outlining the problem, that when you're that the innovation is addressing that challenge that's outlined in the significance section, and that the effectiveness is also kind of speaking to the innovation that's described and the problem that the innovation is trying to solve. So thought I'd just say that too, that it's just helpful to have the nomination flow in that way, where each section kind of works together, and that you're not repeating information throughout the sections, but that there's unique information in each section, building upon each other. Okay. I think we've got most questions answered. I'll give folks a few more minutes since we have a bit of time. Okay, Cindy, Catherine, anything else, last minute tips or tricks or nuances that you want to share before we wrap up? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, I just saw that there was one more question about an employer or colleague nominating an employee. You know, it's perhaps not ideal, but it's also not that big of a deal. Like I just want to make sure that we're conveying that that you don't need to spend too much time worrying about who the nominator is. It's really you know, the quality of the nomination and what the content of the nomination is really what's most important. And we're really looking forward to reading your nominations. We get so inspired by these. Thank you in advance. We know that it's a lot of work to put these together, and we just want to honor the time and energy and good spirit that you all put into preparing these nominations. We are very, very grateful for it, and look forward to them.
I just wanted to co-sign, double click all the words to say that I agree with everything that Catherine just shared in the amount of gratitude and appreciation we have for all of your work and interest in the program, for the time today, and also that we are available for any questions that come up after the session that Mike, as you're putting together the nomination or thinking through whose leadership you want to lift up, please feel free to reach out.
Yes, ditto. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Catherine. And thank you to all who are considering nominating a leader. We could not do this without you. So thank you for elevating those leaders in your community who are really making a difference. And we look forward to reading your nomination. And thanks for coming to the webinar. I just want to answer live that we will be sending this out later today, along with a couple of other resources to help you throughout the process. And good luck. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. hello@irvineawards.org is our contact email. You can also contact us through the website as well. And if you have any challenges or issues with your nomination or nomination form, don't hesitate to reach out. Good luck, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.